The next plant I want to cover is one that's much less well known, and it's a plant that does one group of things, one group of conditions very excellently, and so that's the reason I'm going to talk about this plant. And that plant is silk tassel. So not corn silk and not just tassels, tassel flower, but the two words together, silk tassel. The genus of silk tassel is Garrya, Garrya, kind of like Gary, Indiana, with an extra R and an A on the end. There's a couple of species of Garrya. The family that silk tassel is in is the Garryaceae, so just take the genus and make a family out of it. And then most of the species of Garrya are useful. It's a plant that doesn't grow east of the plains. Basically, you start to find it in Texas, in the Southwest, and then just north from there, going up into partway up northern California. I'm not sure how far into the Northwest range it extends. If you're looking for it, it looks like a shrubby oak with opposite leaves. In fact, it looks surprisingly, amazingly like a shrubby oak with opposite leaves, except when it's in flower. When it's in flower, it puts out, you can see why it's called tassel. I'm not sure what the silk is about, but it has, if you've ever seen a birch tree in flower, it has that kind of, inflorescence, like a catkin, if you know what catkins are, coming off of it. The plants are either male or female, but both work very well for medicine. So far what I'm discussing is a plant called silk tassel, native to the western region of the United States, more common in the southwest region, and it's a shrub. So silk tassel, the part used of the plant is the root bark. Because it's a shrubby plant, it means what you're going to have to do is kill a shrub and just to take the root bark. Now, Michael Moore and other herbalists also use the leaves and stem bark. My experience, though, is the root bark is the strongest. And as I've talked about in the past, for me, the more concentrated the medicine is, the stronger it is, the less I have to carry. So while silk tassel might carry some risk at high dosages of the strongest parts, it is the part that I favor. It's a plant, when I've discussed, if you go back to and listen to my discussion on how to harvest Berberis hematocarpa, or the algaritas or agaritas of the Southwest, the Oregon grapefruits, the Berberises with a chain and a car, and the whole wildcrafting ethics there, this is another plant that's a consideration. Basically, what you're trying to do is remove the root of a shrub. So you can do it with just manual tools, and I have done it with manual tools. It usually takes an hour or 2 or 3. To get the root, you have to dig a hole, gather it, and take the root out. And once you get the root out, the next thing you have to do is debark it. The roots are very curvy, and it takes a long time and a lot of patience to take all of the bark. By bark, I mean the inner bark. There's the outer bark, and then the inner bark, and then the heartwood. So once again, when you're taking bark off of any plant part, there's the outer bark, the inner bark, and then the rest of most of it is the heartwood, the structural element. So it's that inner bark that you want. You take it off. I tincture it fresh. Anytime I've ever gathered, I tinctured it fresh. So I don't know, I can't really speak much to it as far as using dried material. And the plant, so silk tassel, Garrya species of the Garryaceae, root bark, fresh tincture, is used as an antispasmodic. There's a new word I'm using here, and I haven't described it previously, but an antispasmodic is for a smooth muscle relaxation. Your body's smooth muscles are those muscles that are involuntary. So there's exceptions in different parts of the body, but generally, if you don't have to think about it and it moves, and it's not you consciously doing it, it's probably a smooth muscle. So I'm talking about parts of the lungs, uterus, the GI tract, the gallbladder. So all those organs are made of smooth muscles that are coordinated by the central nervous system in their responses, as opposed to you voluntarily moving them. So silk tassel is useful for a lot of those smooth muscle spasms. So the first most common smooth muscle spasm, so by spasm, I mean an uncoordinated muscle contraction, often causing pain. the most common spasm that I see in practice, and I think it's just common, is basically female reproductive uterus spasms. In other words, killer cramps. So with PMS or just right premenstrual, often the uterus has a lot of contorting cramps. For some women are mild, for other women they're extremely painful, and there's everything in between. And silk tassel is one of the best antispasmodics for uterine cramping. It works very well. It doesn't work for everybody, as I would say over with every single plant. But I would say it's the most specific and the most, what's the word for it here? It does it more often than most of the other antispasmodics that I use. So there are things I use like cramp bark and black haw, but I find that silk tassel is stronger. So it's often the go-to plant for me for uterine spasms, but it's also useful for gallbladder spasms. So when people are trying to pass stones and they're having that terrible, painful episodes, it's another time where silk tassel, Garrya species, can be used, root bark tincture. You can also try it for kidney stones, so it's not as effective there. And I've heard of people using it, but I don't have much experience there. But the other two, I have a lot of experience. I see people pass stones not irregularly. And of course, menstrual cramps are very common. Dosage. So I try 1 drop first. This is one of those plants where if it works, a very small amount initially will often show it. So I'll just give somebody a drop and see if their gallbladder spasms recede, or if the uterine spasms recede. And then I start giving small doses. There's a lot of worry about silk tassel and possible negative effects it might have. People have called it anticholinergic. I'm not really sure if that's true. It would make sense for what it does. And anticholinergic is something for a different episode. But people have said if you use too large doses, if the dose is too large, there'll be a lot of negative effects. And generally, I haven't seen that yet. So I tell most people to take smaller doses. And so I guess I'm saying I'm not really sure what its big fear with using silk tassel, but it is a strong plant. And so there's no reason to use really large amounts at any one time. So I try a drop initially with somebody. If the drop helps a little bit, then I'll usually give something like 5 drops. And so as opposed to other plants, I give half dropfuls at a time. With silk tassel, I tend to give 5 to 10 drops as often as necessary until the spasms reside. And sometimes it just works phenomenally well. So it's really helpful to have in a first aid kit, particularly for menstrual spasms, menstrual cramps, gallbladder spasms. And I've known other people to try with other kinds of spasmodic contractions, but these are two where it's succinct and helpful. And I suggest having a small bottle will go a long way. If you have a 1-ounce bottle of silk tassel, usually you cover a pretty large event if you just give people drops at a time. One of the things, though, if somebody has menstrual cramps, you're probably going to want to put some of that tincture in a go-away bottle because you don't want people to have to come to you every time they start to have menstrual cramps, so they can just take it at their tent. And then so what you do is you put 10 or 15 or 20 or 30 drops in a bottle with water, and they can take small sips out of that to try that. And so that is silk tassel.